So, refresh you on what we did last week. We all started discussing about the theories that is relevant to the corporate governance. So, we started with the initial well-known theory, that is the agency theory. So, if you can remember, what is basically the agency theory? What does the agency theory implies? So before asking that questions of agency theory, first tell me what is the reason that we learn these theoretical aspects of corporate governance? We know that corporate governance is not a theory, it's a set of practices, but still yet there are certain theoretical aspects that we talk. So what is the reason that you think? What are the main reasons for all these theories? Why do we learn theories from different perspectives? So if you can remember, we learned about agency theory, we learned about transaction cost theory, and we learned about stewardship theory. What was the basis? There's an answer. Identify the rationale for corporate governance. Theories build foundation to corporate governance. Yes. So we know corporate governance is a set of practices. So to form these practices, say for instance, the practices that is for the board of directors, the practices for the shareholders, the practices for the stakeholders, all of them are uh, having a foundation of certain theories, or I would say theories, these practices are inspired by certain theories. These theoretical foundations can differ from different perspectives. The practices can be formed through agency theory. So we know what the agency theory is. It's simply the conflict between the shareholders and the directors. It's a contract. So with that contract, we identify what sort of a contract they had and what sort of conflicts they are faced with due to this contract nature of shareholder and directors. And so then, to avoid this conflict of interest or agency dilemma, what sort of practices in terms of corporate governance are required? And then we talked about transaction cost theory. So what transaction cost theory simply meant was, when you increase the scale, you are going outside. You cannot make everything inside. You are going to the external environment. Business is open for the external environment. But if we have a proper governance structure, then we can make company everything or company needs internally. So to make everything internally, you need to have practices. So in that, what sort of good practices should there be? For example, you need to have a proper audit committee. You need to have board committees. And you need to have certain information disclosures. So all of these practices are linked to good practices that we categorize them as corporate governance. And then moving to the moving forward, we talked about stewardship theory. That was the difference or the flip side of agency theory. Agency theory uh, highlights the directors and the shareholders relationship as a contract, and they stress that the directors cannot be trusted. Directors are there to satisfy their own interest, but rather you learned in stewardship theory the link between agent and the principal, or rather the shareholders and the directors, was simply a fiduciary duty, where we it implies that the directors can be trusted. Shareholder can trust the director. Director is always there to act for the best interest of the shareholders. But further said, now stewardship theory does not say that you have to disregard the interest of the other stakeholders. They does not say so. What they stress is you can you have to consider the stakeholder interests. However, your duty, your accountability, your fiduciary duty is towards the shareholders. Whatever the matters that arise from the stakeholders' end would be solved through free market opportunities, like in the sense lies employment law, consumer protection law, environment law. Protection of the environment would be safeguarded by environment law, and employee problems would be safeguarded by employment law. Likewise, free market economies, free market activities will solve the problems of stakeholders. Directors have to take care of the interest of the shareholders only. That was the case for stewardship theory. And there were certain criticisms, as in even the theory says that the directors could be trusted, but in practice it's very rare that you being the director would be very truthful to manage someone else's money. I mean, you are playing with, you are handling someone else's money. So it's very unlikely. It's something that stewardship theory is something that we talk about outside of the general acceptance of human nature. Because as a human, we are very self-interested. That's what the agency theory says. Agency theory highlighted that people are self-interested, self-motivated, and they are unlikely that they would think about others. That's the nature of the human. So this is stewardship theory is basically something outside of general acceptance of human needs. So having said that, we saw that to avoid the criticisms of stewardship theory, there were a trend of shareholder empowerment. Shareholder empowerment was shareholders getting involved in the company's activities. There's a trend, especially the institutional shareholders. You will see institutional shareholders nowadays have a good decision-making involvement in companies' activities, especially in terms of strategy formulations. In the institutional shareholders give their viewpoint and give their ideas. So this is shareholder empowerment. There are a bad side of it as well. Why? Too much of shareholder involvement is also not good. Management should be having their own, their own freedom to do the work. And if you look at the shareholders when they are involved with the management activities, shareholders can be different types, different interests. Some shareholders can be long-term focused, some shareholders would be short-term focused. So there would be again a conflict of interest. So even though the developments of stewardship theory is as can be seen, one way of development is shareholder empowerment. It is good, however there are bad sides as well. So then lastly, we talked about the choice of management and the principal, manager and principal. What happened when there's a conflict, or what happened when there's a common agreement of whether the principal and the agent perceive themselves as an agency theory or a steward. What happened if the principal assume the relationship as a stewardship? What happened if the manager assumed the relationship as an agent? If they have conflicting ideas, if the management assume themselves as an agent And if the principal assumes manager as stewards, then there are conflicts. One party is betrayed. So both the parties would be better off, or both the parties would have less mm, betrayals when they are in common agreement. In the sense, principal also think if the company has a steward, board as a stewards, and board also see themselves as a steward. Then no problem. They are having a mutual understanding. In the principal also thinking they are having agent, and manager also thinking they are themselves as agents. Then also mutual understanding is there, and we in detail discuss how what the results, what the difficulties, the implications of different choices between the principals and the uh, principal's choice and the manager's choice between the agents and stewards. So today okay. So resource dependency theory simply means gives the strategic view of corporate governance. Now, corporate governance have different views. No, it has views from the shareholders. It have views from the agent principle and stewardship. So, resource dependency theory. You see, the word simply says it's about the resources. The theory is based on the resources. Rather, it gives the corporate governance is thought of as a strategic view of corporate governance. In other words, it simply says how the governing body, link the company and its resources. Resource dependency theory says how the governing body link the company and its resources. So here, the first line says, governing body is the linchpin between the company and the resources. Linchpin means the linking node, sambandha karne. Linchpin between the company and the resources it needs. So what are the resources it needs to achieve its objective? What do you mean by the resources here? What sort of resources you need to achieve with your objectives? What do you mean by the resources? Human resource, yes. Markets, customers, suppliers, capital providers. What else? Social political networks, financial, customers, suppliers, social and political networks, like those are the resources. So governing body is the linking node. It acts as a mediating factor, the company and the resources. It's the middleman. You have the company and you have the resources, and there has to be a linking body. The linking body is the governing body, or in the sense we say is a director, board of directors. Directors are boundary spanning nodes of networks. Boundary spanning nodes of networks means directors expand the boundaries. Boundary spanning nodes, like they are the one who connect with different parties, different customers, either locally or internationally, suppliers and capital providers. They are the one who connect the business to the environment. Boundary spanning node. They connect the business to the environment. Next line says, focus on the interdependence of companies in a market and serve to reduce uncertainty in corporate collapses. So this resource dependency theory implies the company is interdependent. Company cannot operate alone. It's a part of the society. To operate it, you need to have a connection with the external environment, the resources. So governing body is that linking knot. The governing body is the linking knot. So this theory is based on two sets of theories. One is the social network and the lifestyle theory. So this linking knot, now you have one end, you have the company, and on the other hand, you have the resources. So in between, you have the board of directors. So how do you link, how you maintain the link between these two is talked about resource dependency theory. So that the way you manage the link depends on two theories, social network and lifestyle theory. I will repeat again. How you manage the link, how the governing body or the board of directors manage the link between corporate company and the resources depends on two theories. Theory of social networking and lifestyle theory. Social network means, now if I am the governing body, board of directors are in a certain class. We have certain class. It can be the set of board of directors would be on the high class, or they are, can be coming from the middle class or lower class, and they may be having different income categories, high income category paying. So then the networks that they have is also with the high income category people, high end people, and their education level. If they are really educated and professionals, say for example, if majority of the board of directors are chartered accountants, then the links that they have, or the links that they have with the suppliers, customers, capital providers are also with those type of people that go head to head. Like chartered accountants can be familiar with another set of chartered accountants. Likewise, board of directors, social characteristics in terms of class, their income, their interests, their education level, can the common things that they share can affect the link between the resources. Depending on their social characteristics, these links would uh, depend. And then lifestyle theory. Lifestyle theory simply means their background. Their background in the sense, the sort of individual networks and social standing, how your interests are. Those things can also affect how you as a governing body connect your company with other external resources. Do you understand? So the thing to here understand is social networks can enhance or adversely interfere with independent and objective governance activities. So what you have to understand is, now resource dependency theory is simply how the governing body is linking the external resources to the company. So that link can be affected by social and lifestyle of those board of directors. In the sense, for example, their board of director income, class, interests, background, and their what do you call, education level. Likewise, yeah, those things would impact the way you link the company to its resources. So we have to, because of these reasons, your independency and objective governance, objectively running the business would be affected. Your objectivity of running the business and your independency of running the business to achieve the interest of the shareholders would be affected. So what you have to do is you have to closely identify and monitor such networks, because people involved in corporate governance is linked through networks that is networks that is created by the board of directors. So lifestyle theory is the background of key players. Background of the key players means the background of individuals such as the chairman, CEO, and other board of directors, what their background is. Now they might be having a superior lifestyle, a poor lifestyle, likewise their interest and everything, individual characteristics, the lifestyles of individuals in this particular network. So how they link your resources to the company would be affected by these factors. So then, to practice good governance, so these networks, the way you link, can enhance or even it can adversely affect the governance activities. It can go either way. It can improve the governance activities or even it can deteriorate the governance activities. So what is important is we have to identify and monitor such networks. Board of directors lage මේ network එක impact වෙනවා lifestyle එක, ඒගොල්ලන්ගේ social standing එක අනුව. ඒ හින්දා අපිට හිතන්න බෑ, අපිට කියන්න බෑ governance activities ඒ වගේ personal social lifestyles අනුව impact වෙන හින්දා governance of the company can be good or it can be bad. So to have a proper governance practices, what you have to do is you have to identify the networks that this governing body has created. You have to identify and monitor the activities of the governing body. Why? Because the way they link the company and the external resources is impacted by two set of theories, social and lifestyle theory. Managerial hegemony is, now we say board of directors has the ultimate responsibility of running the business per se. It's like management is running the business and board is showing the path, but the real responsibility of the company rests with the board of directors, not the management. Board of directors has to direct the management, then management run the business. But managerial hegemony implies it's not that board of directors have the responsibility. The responsibility of the running the organization is assumed by the management. Management is doing all sort of work, whereas directors perceive themselves as an elite group. What is an elite group? Any idea? What is an elite group? Elite group means it's not really the best group, more power group. Yes, elite. I would say Rajakiya, they think that they have you know, uh, more it's their company, and they are dominated with both the company organization and its external linkages. It's like the royals of the company, elite group. They are the dominance party. They have all the linkages, and they are dominating the company or the company's operations, organization, and they are not really doing the business. They are not really the governing body. They act as an, a privileged group, an elite group. What is actually doing, who is running the business and taking all sort of decisions, are really the management. Management is doing all sort of work, but board of directors are there as a dominant party, dominating the company. So the interesting point is, now corporate management, when they are running the business, they ensure that the new appointment, say for instance, you are going to appoint new director or the new manager, a senior manager, then they ensure that that new appointment is compatible with this elite group. If you are going for a new appointment or newcomer, they ensure that that particular newcomer fit into that elite group and sustain its image. Now you have an image, a royal-like image, an elite image. So we assume whoever the people, even the corporate managers or sort of employees, and even a newcomer, when you are recruiting a man, an employee, you ensure that they can sustain with, or they are fitting to this elite group. If not, they would not be recruited. If not, they would be not taken. If you are matching to the company's elite culture only, you would be recruited. So even say for example, the most appropriate example is, assume independent directors. So who are independent directors? Who are independent directors? Who are independent directors? So I see only one answer. What about others? Yes, directors who have no relation with executive work, or independent directors are basically outside professionals. They are not connecting to the operational activities or activities of the company. They should be having no links with the company's operations. So if you are recruiting or rather nominating an independent director, they would be appointed to the board only if they are matching to the elite group of the existing directors, and only if they sustain the dominance in the existing group, the ruling group. Only if you support to sustain the dominance. Say for instance, when you recruit an independent director, if he is going to change that entire culture, the dominating culture, then you will not be recruited. The independent director would be nominated and appointed only if they support to sustain the dominance of that elite group. So you see, board of director in here, according to this theory, is just a legal fiction. Because of the legal need, there is a governing body. Legal fiction. So read the fourth point. The board of director is in effect a legal fiction and is dominated by management, making it ineffective in reducing agency conflicts between management and shareholders. And they are dominating. So here you will see a lot of agency problem. Ineffective in reducing agency conflicts. So because of this, now these are things that you can see. You can see in real world, the dominance body. Management board of director is just, just a legal need only. They are not doing the work. They are what they're doing. The party that is doing the work is actually the corporate management. Right? So for here, if you see these type of companies, how can you practice governance? So this theory identifies many changes to the board structure, such as board diversity, board balance, board size. What is board diversity? Board diversity means you take different groups of directors. Now it's rather than in an elite group, you break that. It can be a women participation, board diversity, and you can have a good balance. If it is if the board of directors are, majority of the board of directors are executive, then it's likely that elite group would be dominating. And you can have proper balance of independence and in independent directors and executive directors. And you can get a women involvement in the board of directors and challenge the attitudes, challenge the elite attitudes. So these are, if you can see, in even in Sri Lankan Code of Best Practices, you will see certain codes that is set for board structure. Board structure එකට තියෙන එක codes ගැන ඔයගොල්ලෝ හම්බෙන්නේ නැති if you go through it. The how the board structure would be, what the balance between executive and non-executive directors should be, how they recommend the board diversity to be, diversity in terms of country, diversity in terms of religion, gender, likewise, and diversity in terms of age. So all of these recommendations are, the best practices are recommended to break this managerial hegemony, to break this dominance by an elite group. Is it understood, managerial hegemony? Then what is class hegemony? Class hegemony is, now managerial hegemony is, we have an elite group and management is running the business. Class hegemony implies the self-image of board of directors affect the board performance and behavior. Self-image. How they perceive themselves. Self. Now, we can have different attitudes. The board of directors can have different attitudes. They can see themselves as a dominant party. They can see themselves as, a selfless, selfish, like self-image. තමන් ගැන හිතන විදිහ, self-image that can affect the board behavior and the performance. Generally, this theory identifies executive directors dominate board's decisions. Why? Because they have a lot of information. Class hegemony identifies the self-image has a greater impact on company performance, and among them, executive directors are most influential because they have access to information and they know what the ongoing operations are. They have the decision making power. So then they are likely they may dominate the board decisions. Executive directors tend to dominate board decisions because they have that image, self-image of they know more than the other. Self-image of knowing that, thinking that they know more because they have access to information and they have a good knowledge of ongoing business and they have ability of making decision making, more power, then they likely they would be dominating the company. The power of an elite group is perpetuated by ensuring that members of the board comes from that one elite class. I already explained. So class hegemony and managerial hegemony both are almost linked. Class hegemony and the managerial hegemony. So all of it talked about the self-image. The class hegemony talked about the board as an elite group. Sorry, managerial hegemony talked the board as an elite group. Class hegemony talk on a different perspective, whereas they talk about the self-image of people. So all of it talk about a set of how a set of board perceive themselves, or they identify that board of directors as a more powerful party. They identify that board has more power rather. The power of an elite group is perpetuated means they increase the power by recruiting people that matches to that elite class. ඒගොල්ලෝගේ class එකට ගැලපෙන අය තමයි ඒගොල්ලෝ අරගන්න. The primary function of board is seen to be maintenance of the power of those in authority. Their function is not really running the business. Their function is basically maintaining their power. The theories of managerial class hegemony are rooted in the socio-political discipline. Essentially, studies see corporate governance as interpersonal political process. Interpersonal corporate governance is how people, how board of directors communicate, interact. So how they make decisions, how this power is used is about corporate governance. Then based identification of all these dominant parties, all these elite groups is essential to promote good practices. So is it clear to you all? Now, there seems to be having some problems with the word hegemony, managerial hegemony and the class hegemony. So, here in most of the theories, they refer management and board in the same manner. Like sometimes they refer board as managers. But here in detail, when we discuss the theories, we have to separate what it really means. What is the board and what is the management? It is like, even though they call it as management, sometimes what they meant is directors, likewise. So here, hegemony means the leadership or leadership dominance, dominating part. Management hegemony means management is dominating. That's what it means. So management is not really done by, although the word says management, the company management is done by board of directors. What the managers doing, running the business. Management hegemony simply means it's not the shareholders, it's just the governing body. The management here implies the governing body. Governing body is dominate. Class hegemony means a different class is dominate. That's what it means. Then psychological and organizational perspective. What is? Now, previous theories, if you say agency theory, if you say stewardship theory, all of these were firm level corporate governance practices. To the firm, to the entire firm, to the entire board. We did not talk about individual board members. We talk about the entire board, board of directors, the board structure. All of it were board level governance theories. But psychological and organizational perspectives talk about board level. That is, we are talking about the individual we are taking into consideration about individual thinking and perspectives, behaviors of directors. Here, the theory tries to identify the behavior, the psychological thinking. Now, directors can be having different perspectives. For example, there can be certain directors who values leadership, who values teamwork, who values CSR, who values active participation. And there can be other set of directors who does not like teamwork, who does not like CSR. Likewise, they can be having, if we take 5 different directors, their thinking pattern and their perspectives would be different. Individual differences will be there. This theory tries to identify those individual differences. That is, they say, if we can really know what goes on the boardroom, that is the interaction between the directors, how the directors interact with each other, then we can clearly understand how their thinking pattern is, how the board thinks. Now, say if we can go to a board meeting, අපිට board meeting එකකට යන්න පුළුවන් නම්, so if say there are 5 board members, so we can actually listen to them and understand how the board members, individuals perceive things. Do they value leadership? Do they value participation? Do they value involvement, motivation, inter-board level experiences? If we can go into that detail, individual director-wise detail, then we say that idea rather is very important to good governance practices, in formulating good governance practices. To have effective performance, to practice good practices, we need to understand the psychologies of the directors. But do you think it is easy understanding the individual directors, like visiting a boardroom, going to a board discussion and observing how they share their views and understanding their psychologies, do you think it is and if not, what is the reason? Why it is not easy? Good. That's a covert aspect of human behavior because it's hidden. And the other thing is, even if it's hidden, when someone talk, say for instance, let's take 5 different students, 5 of you, by observing how you talk, if you use the word by listening to the words that you use, if your discussion in your discussion, if some director says teamwork, leadership, motivation, then by the words that they speak, we can get some sort of an idea of their psychologies, how they think, their emotional aspects. You can get an idea by the words that you speak. But this theory, even though the theory says so, understanding that is essential, it's very difficult to for for practitioners of corporate governance to understand, to attend a board meeting and really understand it. If we can go to attend a board meeting and listen what the board interacts, how the board interacts, then we can get some sort of an idea. But in reality, we cannot attend board meetings because board of directors does not like us to come. We are not having access. Will the board of directors let us come inside and sit and listen to their discussion? No, they will not allow us because they are talking about their strategies. They might scare, they might be worried that we would be leaking the information because they are having very secret information. Yeah? Leaking information and avoiding word of mouth, we can say things to other parties. Say for instance, if you are going to formulate good practices of the company, you are given an assignment to formulate good practices of the company. Then one, according to this theory, understanding of individual board, how they perceive their psychology is very important to formulate good practices. Then to understand the psychologies, you need to attend a board meeting. Will you be allowed? Very, very rarely. Why? How could they trust you? You might share the information, you might leak the information, you might give things to the media. So if it is good if we can understand the individual psychologies of directors. However, it is not possible because directors are unlikely that they would give access to the boardroom to all these practitioners of corporate governance. අපිට corporate governance කියන එක ඔයගොල්ලෝ බලන්න code of best practices වල තියෙන්නේ firm level එකේ. Governance codes, best practices are at the firm level. How the board has to be, how the CSR has to be, how to treat your stakeholders. But none of the codes says what are the behavior of, what are the psychological thinking pattern of directors should be. None of the codes says. Why? Because we cannot formulate good practices because we are not given access to understand the directors. They are not willing to let the practitioners of corporate governance to go and understand their psychology. However, it is essential. It is understanding of individual board level psychologies is good. We can have formulate good practices. අපිට එහෙම access තියෙනවා නම් ඉතා හොඳයි. අපිට තව හොඳ practices ටිකක් හදන්න පුළුවන්. නමුත් අපිට ඒකට possibility එකක් නැහැ. මොකද director කෙනෙක් director board එක ඒ වගේ ඒගොල්ලෝ discussion එකකට පිට කෙනෙක්ව සම්බන්ධ කර ගැනීමේ probability එක හරි අඩුයි. So I hope you got the point. See, psychological theories have yet to make a significant impact. So far they have not made a significant impact because of the difficulty in accessing the board. Societal perspective simply means, as the word itself says, now all these theories that we taught had certain boundaries. Agency theory, we are talking about shareholder and the board. Even transaction cost stayed the same. Stewardship theory also the same. Then class hegemony psychological theory is also board and the shareholder. Societal perspective talks about corporate governance is linked with corporate governance practices has to have the focus of entire stakeholders. Any group or person who is affected by or can affect the achievements of the firm's objective has to be considered. Societal perspective. When you are formulating good practices, you have to take the stakeholder perspective. Not just the shareholder, not just the director, but rather entire stakeholders. The concern is with values and beliefs about relationships between individual, the enterprise and the state. It's about the values and beliefs, or rather we can say discourse of responsibility, power, accountability to the society. This theory implies how you discourse, or rather how you distribute, how the company discourse your accountability, the power and responsibility to the entire society, not to just the shareholder, not to just the board. How you discourse your responsibility, your accountability and your power to the entire society. So societal perspective is often called as stakeholder theory. It gives the societal view of corporate governance. Societal view of corporate governance. So simply put in, we can put as, when you are formulating good practices of corporate governance, we have to consider not only the interest of shareholders and the board, but rather the entire stakeholders. How you disclose your responsibilities, power and accountability to the entire stakeholders. CSR is just a part of it. CSR, I am again repeating, corporate governance is not CSR. CSR is part of corporate governance. How you are concerning about stakeholders, one way of looking after the stakeholders is CSR. Then societal perspective, let's continue. Over duty to all those affected by their behavior. That is understood. Even if it's a customer, pressure group, environment, supplier, anyone who is being affected. It says the company should be responsible and accountable. I told you, responsible and accountable of how you disclose the power to all your customers, employees and managers. Directors accountable to wide range of stakeholders, and that is far beyond the fiduciary duty to the shareholder. What is the fiduciary duty? Directors have fiduciary duty. That is right. Fiduciary duty is to act on behalf of the shareholders. But societal perspective says, apart from acting to the best interest of the shareholders, we have an accountability to the wider range of stakeholders. And it precisely say that responsible behavior is the price that society demands. Now, if I explain it, we are establishing our company inside the society. Our corporation is a unit in the society. අපි ඒක society එකේ part එකක් විදිහට තමයි දකින්නේ. So you are getting the land from the society, the people, and when you are incorporating a company, the entire society is being impacted, including the environment. It can be, sometimes there can be pollutions that can happen through because of the company. Sometimes because of the companies, you will be, opened with different employment opportunities. Likewise, the society is giving you the chance to establish a company. So that society is having the cost, bearing the cost of that. So society is in return demanding something in return from the company. Simply said, that's the price the society demands. The price the society demands is looking after themselves. Looking after themselves for the privilege of incorporation. For the privilege of incorporation. Society needs something back, something in return. However, the challenge is the lack of single constituency. Single constituency means, now if we take different stakeholders like customers, suppliers, pressure groups, environmental pressure groups, there are a lot of conflicting interests between stakeholders. There's no single constituency. Like single point of interest is not there. Interests are conflicting. Stakeholder perspective is good. However, because of the conflicting interests of different stakeholders, it's very difficult to formulate good practices. Say for instance, thinking about societal perspective, you might go for a CSR. Some part of the society will like that CSR activity, whereas another part of society will object to that CSR activity because of the conflicting interests. So it's very hard to satisfy all the interests of the stakeholders. That is why it is essential to identify the stakeholder influence and their power. Can you remember what I told? That Mendelov matrix, to identify the most key players, stakeholders who are key players, stakeholders who are minor players. Likewise, you have to identify the most influential stakeholders and then concentrate on them more. Exactly, stakeholder analysis should be used. So this slide further explains about different stakeholder interests that we already discussed. This point is very important. See, directors are responsible for the relationship with stakeholders but are accountable to the shareholders. They have the responsibility for stakeholders. They have the accountability for shareholders. Mark these two words, responsibility and accountability. Directors responsible to the customer, to the supplier, So the employees and the wider stakeholders. They can do whatever the business that they want in a responsible manner. That is what it means. Directors can direct the company in whatever form in a very responsible manner. Responsible because they have the responsibility for stakeholders. However, they have on the other end accountability to the shareholders. You can take responsible actions, but if there is a question, you are accountable to answer that. You are accountable to your shareholders. If they ask why do you do that, then you should be able to explain it. Responsibility and accountability. Understand to this. So, shall we refresh our mind on the theories that we did? Agency theory, done. Then transaction cost theory, stewardship theory, then hegemony theories, stakeholder theories. So here, enlightened shareholder theory is something to connect with stakeholder theory and stewardship theory. Enlightened shareholder theory connected with two theories, stakeholder theory and the stewardship theory. So can one of you say what did stakeholder theory say and what did stewardship theory say? What did stakeholder theory said and what did shareholder theory say? So what are the two theories say? Stakeholder theory and stewardship theory. So stakeholder theory, as you have already mentioned, stakeholder theory said to concentrate on the entire society. Whoever the parties that is being impacted or whoever who can influence the company's operations, the company has to look after. They have to concern of all the parties that is being affected. But stewardship theory was something in contrast. Moreover, stakeholder theory said directors was responsible to the stakeholders and accountable to the shareholders. Responsibility towards the stake, accountability towards the shares. And stewardship theory said something different. They did not mention about the responsibility. They only mentioned the accountability or the fiduciary duty to act. They said there's a duty to act to the best interest of the shareholders. And further, stewardship theory said it's not the responsibility of the board to look after the stake. However, they had to take into account the interests. When you are doing the business, you have to take into account the business of different interested parties. However, whatever the problems that is created would be solved by the free market operation, such as different legislations, regulations, and different laws. So basically, stewardship theory was focused on the fiduciary duty that they have towards the shareholders. Stakeholder theory focused on the responsibility that board of directors has on the stakeholder. So these are, two contrasting things, two contrasting perspectives. So if you say on the list that is there, you will see the dual legitimacy of board is not feasible. This duality is not feasible, practical. One is interests of the stakeholders are conflicting. I told you. Satisfaction of all the interested parties is not practically possible. And also it is impossible to maximize all stakeholder interests simultaneously. I told you that as well. You can satisfy your customers, but on the other hand, you might not be able to satisfy your employees. You can say, for instance, you can reduce the product price. That could be benefits to the customer. But when you reduce this product price, then it's very unlikely that you can increase the salaries for the employees. At the same time, you cannot do that. Reducing the product price to satisfy the customers and increasing the salary to the employees, you might not be able to do that simultaneously. Those are the difficulties of these theories. Yes, so there's a good example. Making operations capital incentive is best in interest of the shareholders, but not interest of the employees, because many people will lose jobs and their incentives and whatnot, their experience, career developments would be affected. But in terms of shareholders, it might be good, a good way of cost cutting, a good way of improving efficiency. However, maximizing both at the same time would be difficult, and their interests are varying, undefined. Stakeholder interests are undefined. Now, if you say customers, there's no definition of their interest, what they really want. If you say employees, what do you really want is undefined. But if it is shareholders, maximizing their wealth, that is given. Conflict of interest is there. So these are the difficulties. So what is proposed is, rather than going to this end and this end, pure stakeholder and pure shareholder. So pure stakeholder is concerned on the stewardship theory, and pure shareholder was concerned on the societal theory. These are two theories. These are basically two theories. The two theories. This is a stewardship theory. Sorry, I messed it. Pure stakeholder theory. This end is societal theory, stakeholder theory, and this end is stewardship theory. Earlier I said the otherwise way. This end is the stewardship, this end is the societal theory. So the recommendation is, we cannot operate in these two extremes. Say for instance, pure stakeholder theory, accountability to all stakeholders. Shareholder theory, fiduciary duty and accountability to the shareholders alone. And on the previous slide, it clearly mentioned why we cannot go to these two extremes. So what we can do is, we can run a theory that goes a combination of these two theories. Rather than operating at this end or at this end, we can operate somewhere here, somewhere over this line. But thing to point is, now you say enlightened shareholder theory is more towards pure shareholder theory. See, enlightened shareholder theory is more towards pure shareholder theory. Not entirely pure shareholder theory, but more towards it. So that clearly implies it has stakeholder aspect as well. අපිට enlightened shareholder theory කියන එක මෙතන කියන්නේ නැහැ. This is not enlightened shareholder theory. Then if you enlightened shareholder theory, if you talk here, what happened? You are more towards stakeholder theory and less towards the shareholder theory. Enlightened shareholder theory focused more on shareholders and also on stakeholders. At the same time, a considerable amount of time is allocated for the stakeholders as well. So this theory implies directors are accountable to the shareholders, and at the same time they have to take the interest of stakeholders as well. They are stewards, but at the same time they have to consider the interest of the stakeholders as well. Further, it is said, if the board can satisfy the stakeholders, if the board can satisfy the stakeholders only, if they can satisfy the stakeholders only, they can make profits and they can maximize the shareholders' wealth. Do you agree with that? Do you agree if I say, if the directors can satisfy the stakeholders only, they can make profits and then they can maximize the shareholders' wealth? Can you give me an example if you agree? I will repeat again. If you satisfy the stakeholders' interest only, you can make profits and then you can maximize the shareholders' wealth. Is it true? Or I can simply say, satisfying the shareholders will be possible only by satisfying the stakeholder needs. You are telling no. So what if I say, who will buy the products of the company? Stakeholders, customers. Products of the company, customers. If you have low quality products, high cost products, and default products, will the customers buy those? No. Without having a customer, no profit. Someone is clearly saying that. If you do not have a good business, if you are not being ethical to your employees, if you ill-treat your employees, if you do not giving proper training, career opportunities to your employees, then will there be people to run the business? Board will be there, management will be there, but who will do the operations? You need employees. And to get your products that you produce, you need to have customers. And if you pollute your environment, there would be pressure groups. They would be putting a lot of pressure. Then there is a pressure of close down in the business. Cost would be high cost, reputational costs would be there. You see, satisfaction of all these stakeholders is a must to make profit. Profit එකක් ගන්න නම් අනිවාර්යයෙන්ම customer satisfaction එක කියන එක essential. Not the customer, stakeholder satisfaction is essential. Okay, so satisfying stakeholders will give profits to you. If you have good profits, only shareholders would be interested in the company. If you are continuously loss making, then no one would be willing to invest in your company. Your prospects are not good. Then you will see shareholder wealth maximization. For shareholders wealth maximization, you need to have a focus on stakeholders as well. You need to satisfy your stakeholders, then you can get profits, and then shareholder wealth maximization is an automatic thing. You don't have to take an extra effort to that. If you satisfy your stakeholders, automatically shareholders' wealth maximization would be achieved. That's essentially what the enlightened shareholder theory says. Shareholders benefit when board satisfy stakeholder interests. Benefit to the shareholders will be anyway given when you satisfy the interest of the stakeholders. So, Arak company is giving sponsors to Children Day. Is it maximizing shareholder value? Well, if you have to look at the share price of the company. Now, see, Arak company, they are doing bad in terms of their product is not ethically accepted, but still they are satisfying the customers to see, satisfying the society to bring a perspective that they are a good company. Even in a packet of cigarette, you see they have a health warning in it. You have a health warning to the customer. Don't use it. You will get these type of illnesses. So those are the tricks that the companies are actually playing. So you see in a cigarette packet, you see that ugly picture. So it is the main purpose of putting that picture is basically to disappoint the customer, to make the customer, repulsive. But people, if you are a really smoky person, you would smoke. But still, all these companies, if you see the cigarette manufacturing companies and alcohol manufacturing companies, they are the people who are doing most of the CSR activities, who are looking after most of their stakeholders. Because they have to get the attention of the stakeholders, otherwise they cannot move forward. So they are doing all sort of things to get the attention of the stakeholders. And we cannot say that they are not doing bad for the customers. Arak alcohol manufacturing company is catering to the people who are drinking. So they are giving their best quality. If you are a drinking person, then if you like that product, then you would be satisfied. Product is ethical or not, that's another question to deal with. There would be another pressure group that is questioning the ethical nature of the product. So then company should be able to answer that even. Say for example, a cigarette manufacturing company, they would be giving the best product at a best price to the customer. But the product is not good, then there would be health people coming in, another pressure groups coming in. So then they will have to take the interest of those people as well. And that is why they have tactically put a health warning. Don't use this, you would get sick. You see, you are satisfying different aspects, different stakeholder views. Otherwise, you cannot make profits, run the business. So enlightened shareholder theory is simply that. Single fiduciary duty, but responsibility to other stakeholders. Single fiduciary duty. The duty is for the shareholders, but you are responsible to all the other stakeholders, corporation as a whole. So see, different boundaries and levels. This is the last theory. Now you see this figure. Now are you all, I forgot to ask, any questions? Are you all clear with the enlightened shareholder theory? So different boundaries and levels. So if you see all these theories, agency theory, stewardship theory, transaction cost theory, resource dependency theory, all of these theories have different spotlights. See, different spotlights. One was concentrated on agency theory, agent and the principal. Others, stakeholders. Okay. Others, the resources. Likewise, different spotlights. But that is not enough. Company agency theory talks about agent and the principal. Taking decision, looking at these two is not enough. There are other parties. But if we take theories independently, if we isolate different theories, these theories only focused on one particular group of people only, one particular area only, either stakeholders, shareholders, managers or directors. We need a theory that can light up the entire platform, a floodlight. These are spotlights. See, all of these are spotlights. We need a floodlight. Floodlight means if this is a stage, we need a light that can illuminate all different parts of the stage. If we take it as a stage, in a stage you see different spotlights. Theories are something like that. Theories are something like the spotlights on the stage that could cover only illuminate only one part of the stage. Stage එක spotlight එකෙන් ඉතිරි ඔක්කොම dark කරලා එක තැනක් විතරයි light up කරන්නේ. So that's the same thing in all these theories that we discuss. But in a floodlight, what it does is it illuminates the entire stage. මුළු stage එකම ආලෝකමත් කරනවා. So we need a theory like that. The corporate governance is a holistic theory. Corporate governance is not concerned about stakeholders, not only the shareholders, not only the board. We have talked about everything. It's a holistic theory. So this theory that illuminates the entire area is system theory. That illuminates the entire area, entire stage, we would say, is called as the system theory. So what is a system? What do you mean by a system? A system, collection of components, interrelated components, I would say. A system is an interrelated components. You have inputs, processors and outputs. Interrelated and interdependent. One component cannot, cannot be isolated. Component cannot work isolatedly, alone. They cannot. Systems are a component that is being interrelated. So is the corporate governance as well. So far what we discussed had different views. It was not components of all these components were not interrelated. All these views were not interrelated. Some views were about principles and good practices. Talked about only board committees, directors and everything. And there were certain views on relationships. And certain views on corporations and the society. These are different views. Corporate governance has principles and good practices. Corporate governance has relationships. Corporate governance has a society, a social responsibility, different views. However, governance is an umbrella term. I told you it's a holistic view. It's a holistic view. Interaction between different stakeholder groups, different stakeholder groups. It's a floodlight that illuminate all the players. System theory address this approach. We can have the system theory. So in a system theory, we say corporate governance as an system, as a components of parts that is being interrelated, so that we can relate alternative views. We are going to relate alternative views through system theory. So in a system, there are three views in a system. If it is a system, there are three characteristics in a system. We can understand corporate governance as a system using these three characteristics of a system. The system has a characteristic. System has a boundary. What is the boundary? Components or the scope. So when we link system, when we see corporate governance as system, so corporate governance should have boundaries there. What are the boundaries of corporate governance? Simply, what should be there in the system environment? Or who are the end users are? Exactly. Company, shareholders, board of directors, customers, suppliers, all of these are boundaries. Boundary is components or the end users. Who are the end users? We have corporate governance. To whom? To whom? That is what the boundaries mean. Then systems has level of abstraction. System has level of abstraction. So then corporate governance should have level of abstraction. What are the abstraction levels at corporate governance? If a system has level of abstraction, what is the level, how do you link it with corporate governance? Micro and macro, rather if we, now that is economic terms, if we express it in simple words, in the words that we understand, abstraction levels are firm level. Governance practices can be firm level or board level. Best practices for board of directors. Best practices for individual board members. Level of abstraction. The details that you are talking about. Amount of detail. Corporate governance practices can be firm level or board level. Firm level, if it is firm level, it talks about the practices for the entire firm, like CSR activities, board formulation, chairman and CEO. If it is board level, details would be board specific, board responsibilities, board appointments, likewise. Level of abstraction. Then systems function. How it functions, the process. How do you run the business? What is in between the inputs and outputs? What occurs between inputs and outputs? Systems function. How do you incorporate your corporate governance practices? The process of governance practices. The process. The process of governance practices. So systems, further, overall operation of a system depends on controls at three levels. Now, if it is a system, systems has to be run. System run venno. So running the system can be of three levels. See, level 1, regulatory level. Systems can run with laws, regulation and rules. So you have a system. University has a system. So in the university, it's not voluntary. It has some rules and regulations. So conformance is mandated. In a university system, conformance is mandated. You have to adhere to university rules and regulations. Because university is a system. A system is a run when level 1. That is, that system has rules and regulations where conformance is mandated. And there can be another form of systems, voluntary. You can act voluntarily. Responsibility becomes the first, responsible behavior. Now, in the university system, it is not voluntary. You cannot there's no voluntary code of conduct. University has some rules and regulations. But there can be another situations, maybe part of society, some part of society, you can have a system of voluntary. It's like, for example, level 1, you can have a rule in the society. You can have, maybe it's a rule to walk on the right side, on the right side of the road. It's a rule. Even in the university, your 80% attendance is a rule. Or even in the road, when you go there, you have to walk on the right side. Otherwise, you are violating the rule. That's how the system is running. Then second level, or systems can be voluntary. Like you respect people. Another system. Respecting people is not voluntary. It's not mandated. It's voluntary. And helping your parents when they are old. When they're getting old, you have to take care of your parents. So that is a system in the society which is voluntary. So systems can be mandatory, systems can be voluntary. And also systems can be personal level. That is concerned with the individual beliefs and behavior. There are certain systems that speak to, that touches the individual behavior. You are going to change the behavior of individuals. How do you think? How do you act? Likewise. These are certain systems. So if we see corporate governance as a system, so far around the world, corporate governance systems are regulatory level and advisory level. We can see corporate governance systems of level 1 and level 2. There are corporate governance systems which are mandatory and there are systems which are voluntary. But so far, none of the codes have developed at personal level. Corporate governance practices should be developed to personal level, but not yet developed. තාම ඒකත්තර develop වෙලා නැහැ. Individual behavior එකට influence කරන තරමට governance තාම develop වෙලා නැහැ. You can have mixes, a mix of systems. Yes, you can have level 1 and level 2. You see around everywhere. It doesn't have to be conformance, it doesn't have to be voluntary, it can be a mix. But the final level is personal level. point to highlight here is governance has not yet developed at personal level. Personal level corporate governance in the common developed plan. It is still a developing subject. So what missing is that personal behavior, respecting others, be truthful, integrity, honesty. That is what is lacking. That is why you have all sort of problems, all sort of corporate collapses. Now we are talking about different codes. Codes. Some of the codes are voluntary. Some of the codes are mandatory. Still, you have corporate failures. Why? Because people are not being truthful, honest. Integrity is not there. You cannot trust people. Why? Because personal level behavior is not molded by these practices. That is what is lacking. Those are the areas that corporate governance can be developed to. Corporate governance can be developed to personal level as well. It is yet to be developed. So that is, I think, basically the end of the theories. So you see, it's a subject in search of its paradigm. You cannot say it's a subject for it's still a developing subject. We cannot say it's agency theory. It's towards stewardship theory. It's towards stakeholders theory. No, it's none of it. It's not agency. It's not stewardship. It's not stakeholder. It's a mix of all of these. So these are the current theoretical positions, how the corporate governance currently sees. There's no conceptual framework, subject is still weak. So we have a common code for all the types of organizations. But we do not have codes for private companies, family companies, different structures like pyramids and chains. So governance can change for depending on the company structures. So the best practices that we have will be matched for public companies, but will not be perfectly matched for a joint venture. So these are things that yet to be developed, these aspects. So generally, any theory of corporate governance needs to embrace relationship with individuals, enterprise, and states. Any corporate governance practice should focus on the state, individuals like shareholder and employees, enterprise, stakeholders, mapping of all the elements that affect and are affected. These are stakeholders. Any governance code should address the expectations, requirements, and demands, duties, power, accountability, and everything. So when you are developing a code, if you have to develop a code, a general code, these are the areas that has to be covered. We cannot just concentrate on one part. We have to take aspects of different parties and think about how they are affected, what we can do to enhance their interests, what we can do to enhance their best interest. So I think when you do further research, or if you are doing research, if you are interested in doing research, you can actually develop a code. You can suggest new elements for the existing code, because there's no theory behind this, but it's sort of practices. But if it is a good practice, then it is useful for any company. The good practices cannot be taken through books. Good practices cannot evolve through theories. It evolved through practicing things. So corporate governance codes, these are general things that has to cover. Based on these general things, even y'all can add good practices to the board, to company, to promote good practices inside the company, good governance practices. So that is basically the end of theoretical aspects of corporate governance. So that is basically meant was how the corporate governance codes are developed. The theories that have influenced to develop corporate governance practices, firm level as well as individual board level. So there are certain practices, I would say, for the entire firm to individual boards. So how the base of all these practices are these set of theories. Because of these set of theories, these practices have evolved.